I also really connect with moral beauty. And it's just something that there are a lot of really hard things about being a physician. And we also get to have front row seats to moral beauty every day. And that's something that I think I know there are a lot of challenges in healthcare, and I also really believe that it's a privilege that we get to be physicians, and moral beauty is something that both, part of the privilege, and that also helps us appreciate that privilege by taking us out of those challenges that we all have, those worries that we all feel in our heads.
I just think when we can sort of overcome some of those barriers are even just internal, and take a moment. I don't think, and it doesn't take time a lot of times. I think it just takes sort of an open mind to allow yourself to have some of these experiences, that I think it can change your day. It can change your outlook. It can change the following interactions that you're going to have with people and patients and colleagues.
Welcome to Flourishing in Medicine, from Surviving to Thriving. I'm your host, Dr. Mick Krasner. This podcast is produced by EmPro, a medical professional liability insurance carrier, headquartered in New York State, and committed through its educational and peer support offerings to support the physicians they insure. Today, I'm joined by two colleagues, Dr. Erica Miller, a medical educator and cardiologist, and Dr. Emily Salib, a medical educator and hospitalist, both from the University of Rochester School of Medicine and Dentistry. In this thoughtful conversation, Doctors Salib and Miller explore how the experience of awe, found in moments of connection, compassion, learning, grief, healing, and everyday clinical practice, can help clinicians reconnect with meaning, sustain well-being, and counter the forces of depersonalization and burnout in modern medicine. I hope you enjoy this awesome conversation. So, Emily, Erica, I'm really curious about how two physicians working in this intense modern medical environment became interested in something as expansive and poetic as awe. And before we even define it and get into that part, I'm curious, maybe we'll start with you, Erica. What's something in the last week that stopped you in your tracks for even a few seconds?
Yes, such a great question. I am constantly on the lookout for awe, and talk and text with Emily about moments of awe and other people in my life. I think in the last week for me, it was a big awe moment, which was our medical school graduation, which I had the privilege of being the faculty speaker for. I talked about awe and the power of looking out to see these medical students, seeing them walk across the stage. Many of them were, very emotional receiving their medical degree. They've overcome so much. They have such different pathways of, coming to medical school and making their way through medical school. All of us as medical students, face challenges, and seeing them really come to the end of that journey was extraordinarily awe-inspiring for me.
Emily, how about you? Something in the last week.
Yeah, so my example is very different, and I think sort of demonstrates how awe can be something really, really big, like Erica's experience, or something really kind of small and intimate. And so I was meeting with one of my dear friends and colleagues who's a pediatric hospitalist the other day, and her husband is a neurogeneticist, and their kids are older. They have very busy and productive careers. And they also are animal lovers. And so they have 2 big dogs and 4 cats. And, it's just this like really fun filled home of animals. And about 6 months ago, they had an opportunity to do medical rehab for a Saint Bernard who had been severely abused and neglected. And he was sick. He had Lyme disease, he had heartworm, he had anaplasmosis. And so they took him in as doctors to administer medications and to care for him and to rehabilitate him. And he was like 40 pounds underweight. And now he's just like this model, like citizen of their home and community in, these animals. And he's so happy. He's gained 40 or 50 pounds and he eats 10 cups of food a day. And and he's just this like love, and he's so happy to be there. And I want to bring my kids over to meet him. He's like 160 or 70 pounds, and he sleeps on the couch with all the cats on him and around him, and he's just so happy. And he's like, he's with the program, and I just thought that was so amazing.
Emily, maybe we could start rather than continuing with awe, which we will get into, and it may be connected. Often open these podcast conversations with trying to get into a little bit about why medicine for each of you. When you look back now, and it may be related to some of what drew you to awe too, what experiences first drew you toward the profession? So not sort of the instrumental things you did to get here, but what really was it about your upbringing, about your life as you understood it that, had you enter this without probably not knowing really what it was really going to be like? So yeah, Emily, how about you? And then I'll ask Erica the same thing.
I sort of had this feeling, I don't know, that I kind of wanted to be different. I was really drawn to math and science, and I knew I just wanted to study science and be a scientist when I was in high school. And so I went with the intention of studying chemistry, which I did. But over the course of my bachelor's, while studying chemistry, I really loved it, and I thought it was fun. And I loved being in the lab, and I was a TA, and I loved teaching in the lab. But I also realized that what I was really, really drawn to were relationships. And I loved teaching because of the relationships I had with the other students. And I loved the aspects of science that really related more to people. And as I kind of went through this pretty rigorous program, I found myself missing that like human element. It was very, very research heavy or theoretical. And then I was working in different labs, and it just didn't feel quite right. And so I took a pause after undergraduate, after I finished, and one of my advisors heard that I was going to spend the summer after graduating woofing, which is working on organic farms. That was like the thing, for free. So I was going to spend the summer working on this organic farm, living in a barn in Vermont. And she was horrified. And she was like, and I told her that maybe I wanted to go to medical school. And she was completely horrified. And she tried to get me to sign a paper right then and there that would commit me to at least a master's, if not a PhD in chemistry at McGill University, because this was just so wild to her. And she thought I was kind of just throwing everything away. But I'm so glad I took that time. I worked on a farm, and I lived in a barn, and I also studied for the MCAT. And during that time, I really reflected a lot. I think growing up in my household and family, there was a lot of focus on humility and service in different ways. And I felt like that would really kind of coincide with this interest and really passion I had for both science, but also relationships. And so I ended up going to medical school and being the first doctor in my family. My mom went to nursing school when I was in elementary school, and so she became a nurse.
Erica, how about you?
So my inspiration for medicine is my older sister, who's also named Emily, who is now a healthy adult living with congenital heart disease. And really, my family, and especially my mom, how they talk to me and, our family and friends about the care that my sister got when she was a baby before I was born. And so our pediatrician, who really was just a fierce advocate for referrals and imaging and all this testing. And, ultimately my sister getting the surgeries that she needed, to, my sister's cardiac surgeon and the doctors that took care of her in the pediatric intensive care unit. I mean, now looking back, I really see the awe in it. I think I didn't really have that language or know as much about awe at the time, but these people, some of whom I've never met, of course, our pediatrician took care of me too and, did a great job, but some people that I never met, but I just felt like they impacted my sister and really our entire family and really helped all of us so much. And that my mom, that really stuck with her even years and years after my sister's surgeries, and that I wanted to help people and families in a similar way. And I also think, my parents are retired university professors, and we really, for both my sister and I, the value of education and hard work, and how rewarding working really hard on something can be, and that can really get you through hard times when it's hard to see the finish line. It's hard to know if you're gonna pass the test or get into the school or get the job that you want, but just having that kind of persistence and dedication was something that our parents really ingrained in us. So that's my pathway to medicine.
I'm going to move into awe a little bit. And Dr. Keltner, who you can tell us a little bit about, describes awe as the feeling of encountering something vast that challenges our current understanding of the world. And I'm curious about how that idea resonates with each of you in the context of clinical medicine. When you think about awe in medicine, what comes to mind from your own experience? Emily?
Dacher Keltner also describes like the 8 kind of universal sources of awe. And some of them are really kind of what you would expect, like nature and music, life and death. And then there's one type of awe that he describes called moral beauty that I think really immediately resonated with me as I learned about it. And I think the same with Erica. And so moral beauty is sort of the type of awe that you experience when you're witnessing the resilience and overcoming and courage and strength of another person. And that just jumped out at me as finally had the name for the feeling that I experience almost daily, maybe not, but close, with being with patients who are sick and suffering, and how they overcome and come together with their families and even hospital staff to kind of meet their challenges. So that type of awe, that moral beauty, it was just like this light bulb that went off when I suddenly had a name for this feeling that I had been feeling all along. And not even just with patients, but also medical students and trainees and even colleagues, seeing what our colleagues do in times of hardship and global pandemics and budget shortages.
Emily and I, sort of started really learning about awe about 5 or so years ago. So we were living through the pandemic. Emily was taking care of hospitalized patients. I was sometimes taking care of people in the hospital, sometimes taking care of people in the office. And I think it was a really scary and hard time for everyone, including physicians. And I think, kind of like Emily said, it helped us both, it helped me step back a little bit from those moment to moment worries. Am I going to get sick? And am I going to get my kids sick? Is there going to be enough PPE for our teams? Is this patient going to make it? These worries that we had, and being able to step back a little bit and see how connected we all are to one another. It was so isolating for so many people, the pandemic, and awe is a pro-social emotion. And so it helps us feel smaller, but in a good way, where we're a smaller piece of something much larger than ourselves. And so it felt really supportive. And then I think, kind of like Emily said, I also really connect with moral beauty. And it's just something that there are a lot of really hard things about being a physician. And we also get to have front row seats to moral beauty every day. And that's something that I think I know there are a lot of challenges in healthcare, and I also really believe that it's a privilege that we get to be physicians, and moral beauty is something that both, part of the privilege, and that also helps us appreciate that privilege by taking us out of those challenges that we all have, those worries that we all feel in our heads. So it's just been so powerful, and it's so accessible. So Emily and I, we joke like hashtag moral beauty or like moral beauty break, and just a tiny moment. We're both very busy, and we can almost always find a tiny moment. Maybe it's at the end of the day before you go to bed. Maybe it's during rounds while you're, waiting for somebody to get out of the bathroom. And then you just quick fire off a text of like, this is what I saw. It was amazing. It was moral beauty. And it's just been really powerful and sustaining.
What a wonderful thing to share together, the two of you, and then share with the people around you. Erica, let's continue on the lines because you mentioned the challenges. In a lot of conversations about physician well-being, we talk about burnout, exhaustion, and moral distress. You talk about moral beauty, and those are very real. But ours seems to be almost like the opposite pole in a certain way of those experiences. You're a accomplished and prominent medical educator as well. And I'm wondering how, if you believe the statement's true, do you think modern medicine unintentionally trains awe out of the trainees, out of its health professionals? If you believe that does in some ways, and how does it do that?
Such a great question, Mick. I do think that we educate, train, or, throughout people's careers after they've completed their training. There are so many forces that are turning down awe that we, are sort of, in a way working against. Time pressures are a big thing. I think, some awe moments happen when maybe I'm rounding in the hospital like later in the day, so the rest of the team is gone, and you just have a little bit more time to like sit down and hold somebody's hand that you might not do during like busy morning rounds. Time, seeing outpatients is always a crunch. It's always, we're trying to see more people and help more patients, and that can make that, of course, there's only so many hours in the day, so that time that we have with each individual person shorter. I think interruptions are a big challenge that really are the opposite of. Emily's done a lot of work connecting, mindfulness and awe, and these interruptions can really take us out of mindful spaces. And so as hard as we're trying to be with the patient in front of us, we're getting, pinged and pages and messages and overhead and a knock on the door. And there are so many distractions that we have to really, and we can, but we have to really actively work to try to take ourselves out of that distracted space and into that more mindful space. And it's hard to do, and it's a practice. And so it's something, that we're all constantly working on, and then also really trying to teach our learners and our colleagues that we're working with, acknowledging how hard it is.
Emily, I would ask you something about whether there's some connection, and sometimes unrecognized by our colleagues, about awe that helps them stay in medicine. Maybe they don't recognize it. I speak with a lot of people on these podcasts, and I start with that question I asked you, why medicine? And I hear really inspiring things about that. So the question is, like, do you think awe has something to do with why people stay in medicine, even though maybe they're not recognizing it as such, even when the system makes it difficult for all those reasons Erica talked about? And how does that work? How does it show up and keep us in the game, so to speak?
I think I agree with that hypothesis that awe, even if it's unrecognized or unnamed, is still contributing to the value and purpose, and that feeling that what we're doing holds value and purpose. And that's even kind of described as one of the effects of awe, as helping you. So it's a transcendent emotion. And so it sort of helps shift our focus from ourselves out to the rest of the world. And in that, sort of our own worries and concerns feel a little bit smaller as we feel more interconnected. And part of that also has to do with feeling the meaning and the value. of being of those connections and being a part of something bigger. And so I think that I've never thought about it like that, Mick, but I think that's a great point. And I think I agree that even if we're not naming awe, and some people, I think to add to what Erica said in terms of sort of barriers to appreciating awe, I think culture is a huge barrier because, we're still sort of in this mindset that as physicians, we need to be these sort of slightly detached, objective towers of reason. And I just think that to suddenly be connecting on such a human level with our patients and their stories, we can feel like we don't have time or the cognitive bandwidth or capacity, but I think it also brings in an element of vulnerability that can be a little bit scary and something that I think even in like the professionalism sort of teaching of providers and doctors, like we're not supposed to be vulnerable in these interactions. And so I think there are some rubs there with the culture of certainly medical education and just the practice of medicine. And that may be why it is even less recognized, but still sort of a force that pulls us to this and keeps us here.
Something I've worried about experienced myself in trying to work in this domain of flourishing and mindful practice and all that. I'm wondering if you're experiencing the same in the last 5-6 years as you've beginning to bring this to our colleagues. And I've worried about this. Have you ever worried about that talking about awe in medicine, can come across soft, idealistic, or even naive? I certainly struggle with this for my own personal sort of professional vocational mission. Yeah.
Every time I talk about awe, yeah, you sort of have to be prepared for skepticism and being labeled as sort of out there and woo-woo. I mean, just this last week, I was talking to a well-being leader at another institution, and because I'm doing a project on awe with our residents. And so we were talking about my project, and he just flat out said, "I'm not an awe person." Like, I wouldn't want to do this project. We're fine in this workshop. And, and so 100% that is out there. And I think Erica and I have spent a lot of time thinking about that when we're presenting this as a workshop or as a talk, kind of recognizing and being really explicit that, yes, healthcare is such an extraordinarily complex and difficult field. And there are so many things that we feel are working against us. And there are things that we can do while those problems are being worked on to hopefully feel a little bit better individually and sort of connect with our purpose. So I definitely, every time I get a little, nervous bringing it up because it's kind of out there.
For the doubters, that they just haven't found like their subtype of awe yet. Because I really think that awe is for everyone. And I think it's so interesting, for me personally, to kind of look back at all of those like really memorable moments, in your education, training, and career, and how maybe I didn't think of it as awe at that moment, but it really was. And so I think what I would say is just try to be curious and try to ask a little bit more. Emily and I, sometimes when we're talking about awe and different subtypes, we are both married to physicians. So we talk about how our, husband's source of awe might be different, than ours. And so my husband's is like epiphanies. And I think that's something that, that specific word may not feel accessible to everybody, but then when we think about what we're actually doing in medicine, we're trying to figure out what's going on with a patient and try to figure out what we can do to help them. And so I think many of us, if not all, can connect to, there was a time when we were really struggling to figure out a diagnosis, or we were trying to treat a really tricky problem that a patient was facing. And eventually it came together. I would call that an epiphany. We're talking to a medical student who's trying to figure out how to read those darn EKGs, and they something clicks and they make more sense. That's an epiphany. That's awe. And so maybe if we didn't think of that as, I mean, it's different. It's different than moral beauty. It's different than what my favorite type of awe is, which is moral beauty. And that's okay. And I have those epiphany kind of like awe moments too. And so I think kind of looking for those, awe moments in our experiences, and then also kind of being curious and like asking questions and finding awe moments in other people's experiences, even if they wouldn't define them as awe moments, I think can be a really great connector.
Erica, you're not just interested in awe as an idea, you're really actively recognizing it yourself, having your loved ones, your husband recognize it, and also helping clinicians experience it or experience it more and recognize it. How did the two of you begin? We'll start with Erica. I mean, Erica, how did the two of you begin exploring awe with colleagues and learners? You took this learning about it early in the pandemic, and then that's a big leap to suddenly, make yourself vulnerable and putting it out there in some way that would connect and be recognized and land, to use a phrase, with your colleagues.
So we would, did sort of background. We first heard about it, in a podcast, and then we both listened to Dacher Keltner's book, Awe. And Emily, full credit to Emily, she cold emailed Dacher and said, we're physicians interested in awe. And, he responded. So I think that was a big sort of like, confidence boost for us as we were trying to spread the word. And then we decided to submit a workshop proposal to the Alliance for Academic Internal Medicine national meeting. And we had no idea if it would be accepted. We sort of were in that language of like, oh my goodness, what if this gets accepted? What if we get to talk at this national meeting about awe, which was really our first. We've done many since then, but that was really our first. We didn't test it in a smaller local. We did practice it, of course, but you know what I mean? That was our first like formal presentation of it. And we, just said, oh my goodness, what if it gets accepted? Oh my goodness, it got accepted. Okay, let's do it. And I think Emily and I both remember standing there in that room, very nervous, looking at all the workshop participants coming in, feeling intimidated, and then delivering this workshop and just the conversations that started happening immediately after the workshop really showed us that other people feel like this is important work. There are amazing colleagues in all these different spaces and locations that are interested in talking and working with us on awe. And so that really kind of got the ball rolling, and the rest is history.
Emily, could you've all mentioned, and I mentioned, Dacher Keltner's name. Maybe you can just explain to our listeners who he is, and just for reference. And then once you do that, I'd be curious about what has surprised you most when physicians begin talking with you about awe together in these sessions that you lead.
So Dacher Keltner is a really leading psychologist out at UC Berkeley, and his kind of field is positive psychology, focusing on a lot of the pro-social emotions like compassion, love, and awe. And he's really been a leader in the awe research. And then he published this book a couple of years ago on awe. That's really kind of an accessible read for the non-researcher and the non-psychologist. And his work is also sort of grounded in like social, like equity and social justice. And so that's, I think, kind of a nice and sort of reassuring grounding for his perspective and how he's kind of framing his research. So I think honestly what surprised me the most was how immediately people seem to connect with the concept of awe, and how quickly they then recognize moments that they've had and are excited to talk about it and share it. Like Erica was saying, we went from having this idea bouncing around between the two of us to suddenly being at a national conference. There was not a lot of middle ground there, and we really didn't know how this was going to go over. And just immediately people recognize, and I feel like people are so excited to finally sort of have a name to put to these emotions, because awe is an emotion and it's a universal emotion this emotion that is really powerful and never talked about, and maybe a huge, like you said before, motivator in why we do what we do and how we find meaning in what we do. And so that was very a nice positive surprise. And then the stories that come out when people start sharing, they don't even have to think hard. I mean, Erica and I, in one workshop we did here at the University of Rochester with different medical educators, and it was a really nice group, lots of different people. It was at the faculty development symposium a couple of years ago, and there was an anatomy professor. This is one of my favorite stories that we heard. He was saying how, he teaches and leads the human anatomy and physiology course for the medical students, and they're doing, cadaver dissection and learning anatomy. And so the course had just finished. They had finished their final dissection, and he was going back into the anatomy lab to get something or, tie something up. And the whole lab was empty except for one medical student. And this medical student had previously been a soldier in Iraq. And the medical student was there by himself, suturing up and closing his donor body, the cadaver that he and his group had dissected, out of just reverence and respect. And this professor had the full awe experience, the goosebumps, the chills, the just kind of like pause where you can't even quite believe what you're seeing. And so the stories like that come out are just really inspiring and fun to be a part of and get the opportunity to hear.
So, Erica, you both have talked about these pathways to awe and moral beauty and that sort of thing. I'm wondering, the physician in me wants to know, like, what's the mechanism and all this stuff? And we don't have too far into, geek out too much on it, but I'm wondering, how does awe arise in these difficult moments, especially illness, suffering, even grief? What are your thoughts about how that happens?
Great question, Nick. And that's some advice that Dacher has given to us, is when we're giving a talk, maybe in a potentially doubtful audience, to really hit them with the neuroscience. And so we really do. We try to kind of go over functional MRI studies, and there are these really, it was so interesting. I think in reading about this, we got to read a lot of psychology studies, which is different, than the typical medical literature that we're reviewing. And, sometimes there are sort of humorous elements to those where, for example, one of the helping behavior tests is somebody pretends to drop a bunch of, they drop a bunch of pens, they pretend it was an accident, and they see how many pens the participants pick up. And that's sort of one way to demonstrate helping behavior. In terms of how it can arise in these really difficult moments, I think reading Dacher's book, one of his big motivators was after his brother Ralph died. And Ralph had been his real partner in awe in life, hiking in the mountains, going on these amazing trips. And that when Ralph died, he felt awe in the moments of being with his brother at the end of his life. And then also he needed to find other ways to keep finding awe and learning more about awe. And so I think awe it has a lot of sort of positive emotion features. And then there also is awe that is really not positive, that are, scary moments, the sort of threatening awe. And this does come up in, one of the studies that Dacher did with colleagues about, in many different cultures, continents, languages, getting awe stories through writing and interviews. And that we can feel awe, with an impending natural disaster. We can feel awe, at the end of someone's life, and it can still be beneficial. So we can still feel, wow, I'm feeling small in this moment. I'm feeling sad. I'm feeling scared in this moment. And I'm also feeling really connected to the world and the people around me. And that connection is very comforting.
For clinicians listening around the world, because we do have a network in our program, what might be a simple way to begin noticing awe in daily practice? some advice you can give to them.
One of the kind of quickest, I think, kind of most simple, like finding awe advice that I give is to look at the sky. And I think sometimes it's not possible. Obviously some of us are in, windowless hospitals and offices and things for a long period of time. But if you can take a moment when you're on your way in or on your way home, looking up at the sky, I think that's such a quick way to say, wow, look at this expansive space above me. I wonder who else is looking at the sky right now. Wow, how big is the universe? These sort of kind of questions just sort of come up right away. I also really find awe in things that we do every day. I'm a cardiologist, I look at echocardiograms every day. And what if I just pause for a second to say, oh my goodness, this heart is beating. It's been beating for however many years old the patient is. Like it's just doing this no matter what we're doing, what we're thinking about. Our heart is just there, just, pumping along. EKGs. I mean, I can just find awe or thinking about medications. How did someone think about testing this medication for this disease? And there's not always time. And I go through many days where I'm not really doing it that much. But as much as we can, maybe it's a post-it on your computer, maybe it's a look up at the sky, before you walk in the door. I think just like planting those tiny moments can be really powerful.
I'm thinking from this conversation and my work in burnout that awe may help restore personhood, both for patients and physicians, maybe acting as an antidote to one of the elements of burnout, which is depersonalization. Even though it's interesting as you describe it, the sense you feel smaller, but you feel connected to something much vaster, which is pretty cool. So, Emily, I just wonder if awe could become a more visible part of medical culture, or at least the experience and recognition that we are in a soup of awe, let's say, if that would become more a visible part of medical culture, what do you think might change?
I think you're really right on to something, Mick, about awe and the potential for mitigating burnout. There is a group, the University of Michigan, doing a lot of work around what they call sacred moments, which are really moments of awe with patients, to often moral beauty. And they're big moments, and they have podcasts where people explain their sacred moments, and they're doing research. And one paper that came out of this group in JAMA last year in 2025 was showing that in physicians who are experiencing sacred moments, even 2 or more, that they had lower rates of extreme burnout. And then when those physicians were sharing their sacred moments with colleagues, that was also protective against burnout. And so to my knowledge, about the only study or research that's been done directly linking awe and burnout, but I think there's huge potential there. And I think and I love how that paper sort of differentiated not only experiencing the awe or the sacred moment, but then also how important sharing it is too.
We're coming to a closing, and I want to share a statement, and then I would love to hear as a part of the closing just each of your reflections on it. Medicine asks extraordinary things of clinicians. You pointed to how challenging and difficult but rewarding this work can be. Yet the same profession also places us in the presence, as you've pointed out, of extraordinary moments: courage, healing, humanity, mystery. And perhaps awe is one of the ways we remember why we came here in the first place. Erica, what are some of your reflections in closing on that?
Amazing, spot on kind of summary of a lot of what we talked about. And I think really naming the challenges that we face in medicine. Emily does a great job in one of the talks that we've given to residents of saying that, even if systems were perfect, it's still really hard to be a physician. We're still with suffering. We're still helping patients and families through just incredible loss and tragedy. And so I think remembering why we're here and honoring those sacred moments is necessary no matter what the challenges are in the healthcare systems, the challenges that we're facing. It's, a powerful and sustaining practice so we can feel better doing this important work that we do, and we can best serve our patients.
I agree so much with what Erica just said, and I think you really did capture it well, Nick. Yeah, I mean, I just think when we can sort of overcome some of those barriers are even just internal, and take a moment. I don't think, and it doesn't take time a lot of times. I think it just takes sort of an open mind to allow yourself to have some of these experiences, that I think it can change your day. It can change your outlook. It can change the following interactions that you're going to have with people and patients and colleagues. And I think one of Dacher's good friends and colleagues, hospitalists from Northern California, Leif Haas, actually was just in Rochester, and he gave a grand rounds for us. And he mentioned how if you want to see culture change, you just have to be it. You have to live it in every interaction. And I think that's kind of how I'm approaching this at this point too.
Thank you. Really, really well said. And I think you're right. It doesn't take a long time, but it just takes a little shift. What Dr. Viktor Frankl talked about in attitude, or to incline our attention in a certain way. And once we practice that, then I think it becomes easy. So thank you so much. It's been a fun conversation, great stories, really a deep bow of respect to both of you for the work you're doing and bringing into our community in Rochester and even beyond. Thanks so much.
Thanks so much for having us, Mick.
Thanks, Mick. This was wonderful.
Thank you very much for listening. We will include a summary of today's podcast and links to Doctors Miller and Salib and other related links that came up in our conversation in the show notes. Please have a look at those. It's a very useful resource. I would like to conclude by sharing another practical, contemplative exercise to help you flourish. So as usual, just taking a moment to sit or stand comfortably with your eyes closed or open. Emily and Erica shared with us how readily available awe truly is if we simply incline our attention toward it. Erica spoke about the heart and its unending beating within our bodies, and Emily shared a poignant story of a student in the anatomy lab, both awe-inspiring. So sitting or standing in this moment, the simple fact that we are alive, and not just the intellectual idea of that, but the actual embodied experience of that in the body, with the mind. If we truly contemplate that, we're suddenly in awe. This can be an unending source of awe. We can experience awe right now simply by our embodied awareness, which is available to us 24/7, literally. It's like the American Express tagline 40 years ago or so, don't leave home without it. So we can, through attention and intention, not leave home without this embodied awareness as a place to experience awe over and over again. I've placed in the show notes a link to a brief film you may really enjoy. It's from gratefulness.org, and I encourage you to watch it. I'm certain it will inspire awe in you and those with whom you share it. I hope you found this podcast and the guided contemplation useful to you, and look forward to having you join us for the next episode of Flourishing in Medicine, From Surviving to Thriving. To learn more about EmPro, please visit www.myempro.com. To know more about EmPro's peer support programs, visit www.myempro.com/peer-support. If you're a physician or medical student in need of urgent support, please consider calling the physician support line at 1-888-409-0141 or visit www.physiciansupportline.com. For information about possibly attending a Flourishing in Medicine workshop where you can receive 25 hours of continuing medical education credit, please visit www.medicine-pediatrics.com. www.mindfulpracticeinmedicine.com. I look forward to you joining us for our next episode of Flourishing in Medicine, from Surviving to Thriving.